Harrison Smith will be back for a 13th season. Does that change anything about the Vikings' plans? Let's talk about everything it means on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. And if you are new here, hello, welcome. My name is Luke. I'm here to take you through the news of the day. You can find the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is in any audio listening place, like the Sirius XM app, for example, perhaps, maybe. Or you can find this show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just search it out on the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. So, first things first today, we're going to go over the Harrison Smith restructured deal, what we know about it so far and what it means for the Vikings, but there's also a little bit of other free agency news to go over, and feels like a pretty good time to just take stock of where the Vikings are at and what other things we can expect based on how much cap space it kind of feels like they maybe have left, which we can't know for sure while we're still waiting on certain like contract details and stuff. But we can know sort of generally how much cap space they have left and what they actually have left to solve on their roster. And then we can use that to try to predict what's still coming down the pipe. So first things first, Harrison Smith. He returns to the Vikings for the 2024 season. That's going to be his 13th season in the NFL, 13th as a Viking. He's a captain. He's a leader. It is a defense that has lost Danielle Hunter, Jordan Hicks, and all of that kind of veteran leadership. I think the next oldest guy on the team would be what, Byron Murphy, or I guess maybe one of the guys they just signed, one of the free agents, but they're new here. So actual veteran leadership is definitely like a scarcity on that defense and probably pretty important as much as it's not like this tangible, measurable thing that we can like put on a stat sheet and compare to EPA. It's still like a very important facet of like a functional locker room. So there is that, but there's also what Harrison Smith can still do on the field. He was one of the most blitz heavy safeties, defensive backs in the league, and therefore one of the best pressure generators, or one of the most prolific, I should say, pressure generators. Brian Flores sent him all the time. And his job, I think, and Josh Metellus' job sort of melded together and had a lot of overlap. So, which would, of course, make things a little bit harder for quarterbacks to figure out who's doing what and such. But, he still would play high safety or half safety or something like that. So obviously that versatility is still there. The question becomes, as Harrison Smith ages, what do we lose, right? Do we lose range? Can he no longer be the middle safety in cover 3? Is that not a thing he can rotate to? Or, the high safety in cover 1? Or can he be a half safety? Can he be explosive enough to be effective in the blitz? Do we lose that as he gets older? Or is it more of a stamina thing? Is it a rotational thing? Do we have to give him, not play him for 100% of the snaps, which I believe he did play for 100% of the snaps when healthy, and basically has his whole time here as a Viking. But that becomes the next question. And I think it may have less to do with exactly what the optimal fatigue management thing is for Harrison Smith. He might just have to play some tired plays, and more to do with, can Lewis Cine take that step forward? Or Theo Jackson, if you're deciding that you're done with Lewis Cine. Or maybe even Jay Ward going into his second year. Can one of those guys take a step forward and sort of justify a little bit of rest for the old guy? That'll happen in practice a lot. And so you'll be able to kind of see where they're at too at the depth chart, even with Harrison Smith out. But I think when the Vikings drafted Lewis Cine 2 years ago, I don't think that they expected Harrison Smith to be around in 2024. I think they kind of expected that he would go toward retirement, but he's not done. And I certainly respect that, and I'm certainly grateful for it. It's interesting with Harrison Smith. He's been here since the Leslie Frazier days. Like, he played with Asher Allen, man. And that was his second year. Like, he's been around for a while. I made the quip on Tuesday that, Sam Darnold, not Sam Bradford, although he was there for that too. Sam Darnold making Matt Castle money once you've adjusted for cap inflation. Well, Harrison Smith was here for that too. He's been around for so long through so many regimes. And it's interesting, you see somebody like Eric Kendricks, very loyal to Mike Zimmer, even after having some unkind words about Mike Zimmer after Zimmer left. It's clear that, that divorce was a little bit bitter, but it's been a couple years now, and I'm sure that was kind of only a thing in the moment because he's going to Dallas. He's going to go be with Mike Zimmer. He's loyal to Mike Zimmer, not necessarily loyal to the Minnesota Vikings and the purple. But Harrison Smith, truly loyal to Minnesota, or at least has been loyal to Minnesota in a way that is like only comparable to the loyalty a fan has. There is this weird thing that happens. I think about it in it's this passage from Denny Green's incredibly controversial book that he published in the 90s. And part of it was this like takedown of the media. And one of the problems that he had, and I think that it's a fair thing that we have to be aware of, is that because we as fans or as media, whatever one you want to decide I am today, which I'll take either, we are always here. You don't fire the fans, right? You don't fire the reporters if the team doesn't do well enough, right? They will be here. When you get cut, when you as the coach get fired, when you as the GM get fired, you leave and the media and the fans stay, and now they are covering your replacement. And so there's this kind of permanence to it. There is this almost ownership that where it's my house and you're just a guest here. And I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of like entitlement with that and to think like, you don't live here. You're just kind of renting this house. So you better be respectful while you're here. And once that player leaves, it's really easy to like lose that relationship that you maybe had with that, even if it was like a totally parasocial one. I mean, look, this is happening with Kirk Cousins right now. And I didn't even want to talk about this, but it's kind of relevant. He says all of the nice political things in Atlanta about how he's excited to play there and blah, blah, blah. And everything he says that's kind about Atlanta sort of sounds like it's almost a shot at Minnesota, which it isn't meant to be. He's just saying nice things about his team because I don't even know if he means it. He's just saying PR crap. But he has this chain that's become his thing because he's Kirko Chains and it says Dirty Birds on it. And it's very fun. And it's like super easy to be like, hey, how dare you? That was our thing. You did that in Minnesota. That was here. To like feel this ownership over what Kirk Cousins does or what Kirk Cousins did in the 6 years that he was here. And I think that that's an unhealthy habit to be in. One, because I'm a freaking football fan. I have no say over what Kirk Cousins did. And yeah, I got paid to cover Kirk Cousins for a while. That still gives me no say over what he does with like his brand. Oh my God. But beyond that, it's just not like a healthy relationship to sports, that sort of tribal loyalty where anybody who's here is a friend and anybody who isn't here is the enemy. It's just never that good to think that us versus them. And I know that's kind of a big old tangent, but I really appreciate that and do not expect from players that sort of loyalty that Harrison Smith has had. It's really special. It's really unique. There's no reason that he couldn't have said no to one of these pay cuts at some point and taken his chances on the market. Now, this year, maybe it wouldn't have been a good idea, like economically, because there's all kinds of other good safeties on the market, and you probably wouldn't have gotten the money there. But I think when you examine who Harrison Smith is and how he's worked through his entire career, even going back to Notre Dame in high school, he is this Ron Swanson-y kind of guy that loves to do everything the same all the time. He loves to like find and establish that routine and master it, which I think is great for an athlete because that's what a lot of practice is the tedium of doing a whole bunch of things over and over and over till you master them. And I think that is part of what keeps him in Minnesota, even as everybody that drafted him, everybody he got to know over years in the Zimmer era is gone. He's, I think, the last player from the 2017 Vikings that is still here. And yet he is still here. So appreciate it while you got it and try not to whinge too much about how he's like maybe past his prime. In terms of cap, I don't actually have the details. It was reported that it's a $9 million contract now. I don't know what that means. If that means signing, if it's $9 million salary, if it's $9 million total cap hit, if it's $9 million total value, if it's $9 million across the next 2 years, and it's both of the next 2 years are reduced, we have to wait for it. My guess is that means $9 million in total contract value. And he has a $3 million prorated bonus cap hit that is not part of what he's actually going to make. So that's like not the number that would like get told to Tom Pelissero necessarily. That would mean a $12 million or 12 and change cap hit, which would be like a savings of about $7 million. That's my guess, but I'll get back to you on the actual cap details when we have them. But for now, it's okay to take a minute and just like be a fan and appreciate this dude that's been loyal to this team for well over a decade. That rocks, and it doesn't happen every day. There's a couple other bits of news, and the roster is starting to take at least something resembling a shape, so it's a good time to take stock, and so we'll do that for the rest of the show. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by Game Time, which is a great place to find last-minute tickets. Either download the Game Time app wherever you get apps or go to gametime.co, and you can get last-minute seats to anything from basketball or hockey games to football and baseball games when they're in season, concerts, theater, comedy shows, whatever's in your area. Shoot, just browse it. Figure out something to do on a spontaneous Saturday night, because that is what they do. Last-minute tickets to things that might actually kind of be hard to get last-minute tickets to, but as markets fluctuate a ton, as an event draws near and even up to an hour into the event, they can find the best prices. Check out their zone deals, where you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for big time savings. You can also get the Game Time guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. If you do find a better price in the same section and row, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. When you're done here, go check out patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL if you want to know a little bit about Jonathan Grenard, who we will probably do an episode about like exclusively, I don't know, the next time we get a chance to and there's no like other major news to cover. But if you want a film breakdown, you can check that out on patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. Let's move on to some of the other news of the day. The next biggest thing that happened is that the Vikings re-signed Jonathan Bullard to a 1-year, $3.5 million deal that will give the Vikings a total of 3 interior defensive linemen under contract. We're getting somewhere. for camp. You usually, especially for a 3-4 team, you will usually bring in like 8 of those guys. So there are a lot of those guys left to come in, and we will basically do that kind of analysis throughout the whole roster, so you can know exactly where the Vikings still have holes, both in numbers and in like, you know, looking for to improve rooms. But right now, if they had to play a game tomorrow, they would be starting Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, and Jaquelin Roy. And here's the other thing: Kairis Tonga not extended a restricted free agent tender. That would have been almost $3 million. Same thing with Cam Akers. Not necessarily something that precludes them from still re-signing, but it means that they aren't going to get the $3 million price tag. So my guess is that those guys are out there testing the market, and now it's just a bidding war like it is or like it is for any free agent. But I'm sure that the Vikings are still plenty interested in some of those guys. And for somebody like Cam Akers, there is just a gut feeling to me that it just doesn't feel that far-fetched for him to return, because I don't know who else will take a chance on a guy coming off his second Achilles injury. That's really rough for a running back that also had like a locker room blowout with Sean McVay. I don't know. It seemed like he found something here, and that maybe coming back here is good, but I certainly wouldn't begrudge him for, you know, testing the market and seeing if he can get something better than what the Vikings are offering him, and then maybe finding out that he can't and taking what the Vikings offer him. I certainly, he would not be the first person to do that, and he won't be the last. But with no Kairis Tonga either, the Vikings have Jaquelin Roy, Jonathan Bullard, Harrison Phillips. Those are their defensive tackles right now. So Here's the thing of Jonathan Bullard. I like him. I've seen a lot of like really mixed opinions and very strong opinions, which kind of surprises me because he's not a guy you talk about a lot. But all right, I guess people have a lot of opinions on Jonathan Bullard. So here's mine. I think he works as a rotational guy. I think he works really well as the guy that comes off the field when you want to do 4-3 fronts, which Flores runs a hybrid. But personnel-wise, they build like a 3-4. So like they have the amount of D tackles that makes sense for a 3-4 and the amount of call them outside linebackers, edge rushers that you have for a 3-4. But they will use like 4-3 over, 4-3 under fronts all the time, or stuff with the Sam walk down and stuff like that. So they use both kinds of spacing. And if you're thinking about like who will join as a D tackle, somebody who can do both of those things, who can line up in even an odd spacing, is actually probably really going to be an attractive idea to Brian Flores. And what if you don't know what even and odd spacing means, that just means whether you're head up or in a gap. So whether you're like on a guy or between two guys and in a gap. Even spacing has everybody line up in the gaps. And usually that means there's more with 4-3s. There's typically more players in the box. It's a little less spread out. And you'll have one guy kind of responsible for each gap. So you'll do one gap, or nowadays it's more like gap and a half, where you'll have a primary gap. And then also the gap next to you, you can also flash across if the run happens to go there. And then in a true blue 3-4, like old school Vince Wilfork kind of thing, you'll have somebody 2 gap where everybody has their specific gap. But what you want is usually you end up like one guy short of covering every single gap, just the way that defense works out, especially if you want to play with 2 high safeties. So you'll have to have one player, and usually that's the biggest guy, the nose, will be responsible for 2 gaps. So he lines up directly on the center. You get a guy who's way bigger than that center and say, okay, if it goes to the left or the right, you're responsible, and you have to like kind of read the running back and figure out which. But hopefully you're big enough that you can dominate that blocker and you can control him and get to whatever side you have to get to. That's the idea, right? So you want somebody that can work in both of those contexts. And what changes is fairly nuanced. It's just a matter of how you explode and how you read steps. When you're in odd spacing, it's a little bit more about the physical. It's a lot about whatever happens, I'm on this guy. I'm lined up right in front of him. He's going to block me pretty much no matter what this blocking scheme is. So I got to explode, and I know who I'm getting, and it's more like this mano-a-mano wrestling match. Versus even spacing, there's a little more read and react to it. I could end up on that guy. I could end up on this guy. It depends on where the run goes. It depends on what stunt I'm doing. It's a more complicated game that can sometimes require a little bit more quickness from those interior guys, and a little bit more of like eyes, a little bit more reading and making decisions. And then you get into the phone booth part. So you want something a little more balanced. It's nice to see somebody with all of those skill sets. I think Harrison Phillips is one like that, for example. And so we'll see what happens with those D tackles. And then in terms of Cam Akers, I don't know. I feel like the idea of bringing him in on a minimum deal to see if he makes the team, see if he's healthy at all, see if he can even get on the field, can't hurt. There's no real cost to doing it. There would have been a cost to like tendering him. That would have been, a $3 million deal. But just bringing him in for camp and, on a min deal with no guarantees or anything like that would be costless. And the only thing standing in the way is either A, if the Vikings just think he's totally cooked and it's not even worth their time, not even worth a spot on the 90-man roster, which, some of those go to like XFL guys. They'd rather have an XFL running back. I guess that's fair. Or if somebody else wants to actually pay him something and the Vikings don't want to match, then I suppose that's fair enough as well. So let's look at where the Vikings roster is at on the whole right now. They have, by my count, between the free agent signings and returning players that made the team last year. So I'm not talking about like futures contracts, practice squad guys. They got 45 players, making them 8 short of a whole 53. So let's talk about where those 8 may go and what we can potentially predict for the future, for the immediate future of free agency. Today's episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA too? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on that 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. The offer is good through April 30th. So get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Let's move on here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Let's take a look at the Minnesota Vikings roster. Let's do a little like if they had to play a game tomorrow. Not saying that they do, and there are a lot of these rooms that feel very, very incomplete, but like, okay, if they had to play a game tomorrow, what are their biggest problems and what tools do they have to solve those problems? So according to Over the Cap, the Vikings are sitting currently on $18 million in cap space. Now that is an outdated number already because that does not include the pay cut that Harrison Smith took. That does not include Jonathan Grenard's contract, which we don't have details for yet, so they haven't entered it into their system. That does include some other smaller contracts like John Parker Romo or Jonathan Bullard. So that is a fairly inaccurate number. But let's just roll with it because it kind of actually feels like the Harrison Smith pay cut is going to cancel out with all those other things. And we'll say, okay, 18 mil to spend is like what you actually have to work with. So given that, and the way that they will structure contracts, they aren't going to be the same amount of money in each year. If it's a 3-year deal for $30 million, it almost never goes 10 mil, 10 mil, 10 mil. There's usually some signing bonus. There's usually a little bit of escalation, some backloading, some, this is just supposed to inflate with the cap. And that's how all of the contracts that we've seen so far work with the Vikings. So I would anticipate ones like Grenard and any future free agent signings would work that way as well, unless they're 1-year deals. And then I don't think you're doing void years or anything like that necessarily. I don't know. Maybe they could. Well, an interesting thing, Sam Darnold's got like 6.8 of his 10 million is in signing bonus, which makes me think there might be void years on it just because why would that much be like signing bonus versus salary? But that could have also been a choice of Sam Darnold, not Sam Bradford's. Sammy Skull is back and it's ruining my brain. But like that could be a choice that he made for cash flow reasons or whatever. So not necessarily, but like maybe there are like void years on it to like split up his cap hit a little bit, which I guess they're perfectly set up to do because 2025 cap space is $129 million. And by the way, that also includes a Harrison Smith cap hit of $22 million, which he absolutely will not see. We'll do this same pay cut thing tomorrow, or maybe he'll retire next year, and maybe they'll retire next year. So that's also an option, or get cut or whatever, right? So regardless, they have money to play around with. And if they even backload some contracts, even if they sign like 3 more-ish free agents, they're still going to have like 90 mil in 2025 cap space to work with. So they can afford to be a little bit fast and loose with some of those backloads, and like use that to sign instead of 2 free agents, maybe 4 or 5 like real players here. So let's look at the contract and where we stand. At quarterback, they've got Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, and Jaren Hall. Those are the 3 quarterbacks under contract. Those are your 3 guys. Obviously, if they end up going into camp with those as the 3 guys, something has gone terribly wrong in the draft. So pencil in a rookie there, and that's going to be your 4. And one of those guys gets cut at the end of camp. I think we can feel all right about that, depending on how we feel about the rookie, of course. So I don't anticipate any more quarterbacks is what I'm saying. I'm pretty sure I'm on safe ground there. At running back, kind of the same deal. You can maybe see Cam Akers come back, but otherwise you have Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler, Kene Nwangwu, and I'll count CJ Ham as a running back. Usually they will have 5 if you count the fullback, or in the last couple years. It's not unheard of to have 4, including the fullback, so just 3 running backs. So they could run into that. So it's like maybe an optional thing. Maybe that's a 6th round pick kind of deal. Which I actually think as a day 3 running back, this is a pretty good roster right now. Now that you have Aaron Jones, you have this like bona fide starter, a random flyer on some depth actually feels like something it feels like a pretty good idea to just kind of keep injecting youth into that room at a fairly low cost. The tight end room probably runs back the same way it did before. TJ Hawkinson, Josh Oliver, Johnny Munt, Nick Muse. And then you'll have this, well, do you keep the fourth tight end or not kind of drama at 53-man cutdown day? That's all fine. O-line is where we hit the first real big hole with, Darisaw, Bradbury, Ingram, O'Neal. Those are your 4 returning starters. You've got Blake Brandell, who I am going to guess right now, camp competition for that left guard spot with somebody who's not on the roster yet. I don't think that making $3 million a year anoints you a starting job. Maybe it did 3 years ago, but not now. This is restricted free agent tender money, not we got guards making $20 million a year elsewhere in the league. So I don't think that anoints him with a starting job. I know some people see like a number that is over, $1.5 million and think, oh my God, that's a starter. Not so much. I don't think. So I think that there is a starting guard coming in, and maybe that's a day 2 draft pick, or maybe they go out and get Kevin Zeitler or something like that, or some other guard that you're not as familiar with. But that would give them 7 total offensive linemen, because you've got David Quessenberry as well. So they got 6 total offensive linemen that made the team last year under contract. They got guys named Coy Cronk also on the roster, unless they pull off a big surprise. I'm thinking probably more of practice squad or camp body types. But that means that to have the 9 or 10 that you typically have in a 53-man roster, you got 2 or 3 linemen coming. So that is definitely a place to look if you're trying to predict where the free agents are. I think maybe 2. And then you draft 1 or something like that. We already talked a little bit about defensive line, interior defensive line. That's a 4 or 5 group. So at least 1, I think, is joining the team. Maybe even, a free agent and a rookie, or maybe even a couple of free agents. At edge rusher, that's also a 4 or 5. And in terms of guys who made the team last year, you have Patrick Jones and Andre Carter. And then you can probably pencil in Grenard and Van Ginkel, right? So that's 4. And the way I usually work it out is the defensive line in total will add up to 9 or 10 if you've got like a lot of depth. But 10 is, I think, less common. So it'll add up to 9. So they've got 7 right now. So I think there are 2 guys left to join. If I were betting on it, yeah, I would say a couple of defensive tackles because they use those more. But at least 1 defensive tackle and then another like defensive lineman of some sort. And maybe that's a rookie as well. At linebacker, I think you've got 3 when you want 4. You've got Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace, Brian Asamoah. You cut William Kwenku. That's it. That's literally it. That's the rest of the guys on the roster. So there is 1 to be added there. But again, that could be a 4th round pick, one of those day 3 guys. Or it could be somebody that, a less exciting name. And then on the secondary, I think you have your requisite 11. Between corners and safeties, and the line is getting very blurry with that in the Brian Flores world, so I won't try to define it too bad. But you've got Brian Murphy, Caleb Evans, Andrew Booth, Mekhi Blackman, Najee Thompson, we'll pencil him to the roster again, Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, Jay Ward, Lewis Seen. Those are your guys on the team. That would be the group last year, and the whole group is returning. Now, do you want to add a guy to that? Yeah, potentially. And I could totally see them bringing in a corner. They apparently, according to Darren Wolfson, they were in on L'Jarius Sneed, but it's hard to be aggressive in that one because you're saving your draft picks for a quarterback. But there's also that kind of means that you're at least interested in acquiring a quarterback. You're open to the idea. You don't see this as a complete room necessarily, but in terms of if they had to play a game tomorrow, they would have at least the right amount of bodies. So I would imagine not so much of a priority as something like offensive line or interior defensive line, but still definitely worth looking at. And then in terms of specialists, they got Romo, and then they're returning their punter and their long snapper. That puts them at 45. So 8 guys, and I think a lot of them will be in the trenches. I guess that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. And of course, some of those 8 will come from the draft, but like we're talking rosterable players here. Those aren't sevenths necessarily. Some of those are depth, but that's where one of them is going to be a quarterback, right? A rookie quarterback, of course. But depending on how much of this year's draft they need to use to trade up, which they've been talking to New England and maybe even Arizona about that. So they know what it'll cost. They know what to set aside for sure. I'm sure they've had that conversation. That can help you plan in free agency in terms of how many guys you need to bring in to make sure that you have the requisite depth. If you trade your entire draft, do you still have enough bodies? That's what they're going to start to deal with here in this sort of next wave of free agency. Maybe a little quieter, not quite as exciting of names on the board now. These aren't the guys that get you on SportsCenter, but they're important nonetheless. They still do a role, and that role is important even if it doesn't have as much fanfare. So tomorrow, I would love to talk to you about Jonathan Grenard. Obviously, we're at the mercy of the news cycle here, but barring that, I'll talk to you about Grenard, and then I'm going to start watching Sam Darnold next. So we're going to start going through these guys, picking through them as we get a chance to, so I hope you're along with me for that ride. I'll see y'all tomorrow, and as always, Skull.